What you're listening to right now is a song called Maple Leaf Rag, a song that sheet music dates all the way back to 1899 when it was published by musician Scott Joplin. Now, while it's likely true that you didn't know the name of this song or who was the author of this sheet music, you're probably familiar with the tune because, like many older works in our history, it's made its way into the public domain, and when something makes its way into the public domain, it starts being used by everyone because it's free to use. So you might know this song from cartoons, old movies, or something somewhere in your childhood that you can't quite place. Now, even though this song has become incredibly widely used in many forms of media, chances are you've never actually heard Scott Joplin play it. In fact, the version of the song that I'm using, or have used thus far, comes from the YouTube audio library. Now you might be thinking, Sean, the song is from the late 1800s. There's no way we're gonna hear the guy who actually wrote the sheet music play it, because it's just too old for that. And the thing is, that's not the case. In fact, Scott Joplin died in 1917. The oldest known recording of this song comes from a Marine Corps band in 1906. Now you might be thinking, Sean, so what if the Marine Corps version, which is the oldest surviving recording of this song, predates his death by 11 years? Joplin may have not had the ability to record this song, or maybe he recorded this song and that song was destroyed. You know, it's the oldest surviving version. Maybe there's another version that just didn't survive. You know, fires happen, all kinds of accidents happen in the early 20th century. But that's actually not the case either. While the Marine Corps version is the oldest recorded version, there is a Scott Joplin recorded version of this song, and it is available for the public. But the reason you haven't heard it is because it was recorded 1 year before Joplin died. In fact, the Joplin recording is incredibly easy to find. It's actually available on the Wikipedia page for the song. It's free to play, it's in the public domain, and the sound quality on it is fantastic. In fact, I'm going to play a little bit for you. Now, just listening to that recording should give you an indication of why this version of the song is never played in anything that you've likely heard before, because Joplin recorded this when he was on the verge of death, and the disease that was afflicting him was syphilis, and at this point in the progression of the disease, it had destroyed his coordination. So listening to this song is almost tragic when it's played by Joplin, and there's just something about listening to this and knowing that at one point in time he was a master of his craft, and hearing the degradation in his skills due to the fact that he was just ill. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Sean, what in the world does this tragic story of the Scott Joplin recording of his own music have to do with Cenk's 2020 campaign? And I would submit, in the same way that it is tragic to watch a master of their craft fall from grace due to no fault of their own, it's equally as amusing to watch someone who thinks that they are a master at their craft fall from grace completely due to faults of their own. Cenk Uygur is a first ballot Hall of Famer in terms of Monday morning quarterbacks. There's a joke around the internet about the Young Turks that basically goes, no matter what your job possibly is, the Young Turks will find a way to tell you how to do it better. Now, the reason this is a joke is because Cenk Uygur and the people at the Young Turks aren't qualified to tell anybody how to do their jobs when the Young Turks aren't good at doing their own job. They're not a real news outlet. They're a commentary channel that I founded a business based on badly butchering news stories and taking their political opponents out of context and smearing them. Now, Cenk Uygur, the Young Turks, and really the entirety of the YouTube progressive media have always had delusions of grandeur. They always thought that the progressive agenda was the winning agenda, and the only thing that you needed to couple with that progressive agenda is the willingness to fight back, to advocate for your positions, because in reality, no one can beat the progressive positions, you just have to fight for them.
He's right that numerically there's not that many of you, but you got the people power. Because this small group of lefties represents the silent majority of Americans. Well, it's time to make that silent majority not so silent anymore. All things being equal, if all things were equal, and it was actually a battle of competing philosophies and ideas, the left would be running roughshod over the corporatists.
But surprisingly, even though the solution to all of the problems in this country, according to online progressives, are incredibly simple and easy, and running on those solutions is incredibly popular and will inevitably lead to electoral success, we haven't seen a lot of people from progressive media make the jump to running for office. Now, a cynic might believe that the lack of progressive media figures taking the time to run for office and winning is largely due to the fact that they don't actually buy into their own nonsense. However, that's too much self-awareness and too much credit to give to the folks in the progressive media. Maybe they believe in their own narrative a little bit too much. While they do genuinely believe that the progressive agenda is the winning agenda, they also believe that the boogeyman of money in politics is going to come for them if they attempt to run for office, and all this corporate censorship and corporate media that tricks people into not voting progressive because everybody wants to vote progressive is a legitimate threat to any legitimate progressive candidate. Now, I actually believe that many progressive media figures believe in the latter rather than the former, and I'm definitely including Cenk Uygur in that regard. Because Cenk Uygur could have run for office multiple times throughout the history of the Young Turks. In fact, there were rumors a couple of years ago that the Young Turks would run Anna Kasparian against Dianne Feinstein in the primaries for her Senate seat. I'd speculate that Cenk Uygur has been mulling over this run for office for an incredibly long time. Cenk knew that if he ran for office, he could use his platform, the Young Turks, to promote his campaign. He knew that he made enough connections to get himself on CNN, on local California news, and all online progressive media outlets that have had him on as a guest during his campaign. However, up until this year, Cenk Uygur has never attempted to run for office before, and I think the change can be attributed to two main factors, one of which is definitely not Katie Hill resigning from Congress due to her scandal, because Cenk Uygur actually registered the domain for cenk2020.com prior to Katie Hill's resignation. The two factors that I think really impacted Cenk and really made him think that he could win is the election of Donald Trump and the election of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You see, Cenk fundamentally believes that polite politics is losing politics, and the key to victory in American politics is fighting back.
I will not be a standard politician. I will fight for them. I'm gonna fight to get money out of politics. If you wanna fight, and if you want a real fighter, to fight for women's rights on every issue. But what's the size of the fight in you? This is the day to fight more than any other day. You say to people on that day, don't fight today. And when no one is paying attention anymore, that's when you're supposed to fight? No, you get in the fight right now. Don't get in the fight then. People believe in sending a fighter to Washington. What you need is fighters. Every day I wanna fight for you.
And say whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, but the guy fights back against his opposition. And Cenk, being a bombastic guy himself, sees Donald Trump's victory as proof of what he already believed, that fighting back is the key to winning. And you could see that simplistic worldview play itself out in the candidates forum, where Cenk Uygur tried to turn every single question asked of him into an attack against Christy Smith.
There are huge differences between the candidates here, and I'm really glad that Christy finally showed up so we could have that discussion. So, my opponent says that she'd like to work with Republicans at all levels. Donald Trump is at one of those levels. I would love to ask her, what is she going to work with Donald Trump on? I don't want to work with Donald Trump. I want to defeat Donald Trump. My opponent, on the other hand, her average last year was $2,700 from AT&T, Facebook, United Health. That is the largest insurance company in the world. Are you going to give that back? And are you for Medicare? Are you against Medicare for all because you mean it? Or are you against Medicare for all because United Health gave you money? On the other hand, Christy, for example, voted to deny undocumented immigrants Medi-Cal. Why did you do that? Christy has also taken money from Sempra. She took it from SHP PAC. I'm glad you're booing her. You should. You shouldn't take money from Sempra. Well, I definitely haven't taken PAC money from somebody who wasn't in my party. I also haven't taken lobbyist money from anybody that wasn't in my party, like John Musella.
Look, I think the format of this event is incredibly unproductive. There were actually 3 groups of 3 or 4 candidates, so Cenk Uygur wasn't even getting asked the same questions as Christy Smith. But regardless of how you feel about the format, you can't just pretend that it's a one-on-one debate. Cenk looked incredibly petty, lashing out at Christy Smith at the end of every question. And Christy Smith, when she finally addressed him, did it in a strong and proper way.
Well, I'm proud to be the only candidate on this stage, again, that's endorsed by Citizens United and Indivisible because of my longtime commitment to this issue exactly. And my voting record is very consistent with that, and my contribution record reflects nothing like what's been expressed on this stage today. So I hope your stunt pays off.
Now, on the flip side of that, Cenk Uygur also believes that that fighting nature needs to be paired with the progressive agenda, because Cenk believes that the majority of the country are on board with him in terms of policy. So when he sees a no-name congresswoman like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez run for office under the banner of Justice Democrats, which he founded, regurgitate his ideas, and beat the number 3 Democrat in the House of Representatives in the primary, then go on to win the general election, then become one of the most famous members in the House of Representatives, Cenk thinks, why can't I do that? Why can't I be the leader of the squad? I have all of the fight and the bad attitude and the lack of politeness that Donald Trump has, plus AOC has literally adopted all of my ideas. She's a member of my audience that I ran for office as my puppet. Now, while this might sound compelling to one who has an incredibly simplistic worldview, what you have to realize is that 2 dots make a line, not a pattern. Sure, Donald Trump is popular now amongst Republicans, but remember, he was getting 30% of the vote in a primary where he had 100% name recognition against 10 other candidates. And while it might sound impressive that this no-name bartender managed to beat the number 3 ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives in a primary, this kind of thing has happened before, and pretty recently. People seem to forget that Eric Cantor was the number 2 Republican in the House of Representatives, on his way to replacing John Boehner as Speaker in the House when he lost a primary to a no-name professor who ran in his district. Now, while this was an incredible shock at the time, as no person that high-ranking was beaten in a primary before, in the grand scheme of things, it had very little impact on the Republican Party. While in a lot of ways this was considered to be a stunning upset, in a lot of ways it was just a blip in a sea of the status quo. And that's what Ocasio-Cortez's victory was, because while she gets all the press and she gets all the credit because she's a young, good-looking person for unseating Crowley, the Justice Democrats overall got wiped out in that election cycle. Most of the candidates got obliterated in the primaries, and the only candidates that actually made it to the point where they could take office won in solid blue districts where anybody could have won. In fact, Joe Crowley, the number 3 Democrat in the House of Representatives, actually didn't even bother campaigning against Ocasio-Cortez because he thought it would make him look bad to campaign against such an inexperienced person in the Democratic primary. So Ocasio-Cortez won against the guy that didn't really campaign against her. By contrast, Cenk Uygur is running in an open seat in a district that he doesn't even live in, with people who have no problems campaigning against him. You have to be incredibly ignorant to believe that the Trump or Ocasio-Cortez victory formula is duplicatable across the board. Trump, like I said, had 100% name recognition in a crowded primary, and then ran in the general election against one of the most unpopular candidates in American history. He also was built up by pop culture for decades as this amazing, successful businessman. Ocasio-Cortez had an opponent that really wasn't interested in running against her, and she ran one really successful ad during the primaries that got about 10,000 people to show up and vote for her. Cenk doesn't have anywhere near the name recognition that he thinks he does, and the people of California 25 that do know his name are just as likely to know his name for something bad as they would to be to know it for something good. That's a recipe for failure. Also, despite being a prolific smear merchant himself, someone who's used to taking one quote out of context and using that to define a person as a whole as long as he disagrees with them politically, Cenk Uygur was not prepared to have his past dug up and used against him in this campaign. He was not prepared for the people that he alienated over time to come out with their stories in the most inopportune time for his campaign. Now, I've gone over some of the dumber Young Turks clips that have popped up over time on my previous video on Cenk's 2020 campaign, but one of the most recent things that Cenk Uygur was completely unaware was coming was the TYT Union, people who work at the Young Turks who are trying to form a union, coming out and sandbagging the guy on the day that he was set to debate Christy Smith. Now, the TYT Union is coordinating with a larger union that has actually endorsed Christy Smith, so this should have surprised Cenk in no way, shape, or form, yet when it happened, all he could do was say, oh, there's something suspicious about the timing, the union's a liar, all things that make him look bad, and all things that make him look hypocritical. Now, as if your employees throwing you to the wolves on the morning of your debate isn't bad enough, Cenk Uygur's nephew, the man that Cenk Uygur handed a job out of pure nepotism, a job that paid $65,000 a year, by the way, which is a salary that in no way, shape, or form the average, more qualified TYT employee was making, actually retweeted this. I mean, seriously, think about how dirty that is. When Cenk's nephew moved to Los Angeles, he stayed in Cenk Uygur's house. He drove Cenk Uygur's car because he didn't have his own. When he couldn't get a job because he's not qualified to do anything, Cenk Uygur hired him on at the Young Turks, a platform that Cenk's nephew used to promote his own Instagram and his own Twitch. He used the connections that he made from being a Young Turks employee and being Cenk Uygur's nephew to get other progressive media figures to come on and then promote that Twitch. But now, a couple of months after he left the Young Turks, a company that shielded him through the whole America is responsible for 9/11 and Dan Crenshaw debacle, Cenk's nephew, with one of the platforms that was handed to him by his uncle, uses it to shiv him in the back on the morning of his debate. Cenk was not ready for this campaign. He did nothing to cover his bases before running for office. I saw polling numbers that indicated that Cenk Uygur topped out at around 5%, and Christy Smith and the Republican in this open primary are just wiping the floor with him. I watched Cenk Uygur's debate versus Christy Smith, which was not a one-on-one debate. It was actually a candidates forum, which is just a disastrous format. But Cenk Uygur tried lashing out as much as possible to get Christy's attention, with very little success. He just came off looking like a jerk. What we're seeing right now is the inverse of Carl Benjamin's run for office in the UK. Sure, you might have a big channel with more subscriber numbers that greatly dwarf what any individual candidate will get in terms of votes running for office. But unlike a congressional district, which is the concentrated population, your subscription and viewer base as somebody who does political commentary is spread out across the country. I'd say less than 10% of the American population actually follow politics. Maybe half of them follow it online on YouTube in video format. So we're all fighting over the same 15 million people across this country that engage with this type of content. That's not a significant portion of the nation, and while having a viewer base spread out across the country relatively evenly can translate into financial and business success because you don't need to be in the same location to connect with your audience, that's not going to translate into votes because the chances of any one of your individual constituents not only being somebody who engages with politics on the internet, on YouTube, is incredibly low, but also having them be a person that engages with your content specifically is significantly lower. Now look, you might agree or disagree with my analysis of this race, you might think I'm right or Cenk's right, but that's not really relevant because this race is a little over a week away. So we're going to find out who's right because the voting is March 3rd. I'm willing to attach my name to my predictions, so let me know what you think is going to happen March 3rd in the comments down below. If you like this video, then show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via one-time donations on Venmo or PayPal, or monthly on Patreon or Subscribestar. This has been me updating you on Cenk's 2020 campaign. Till next time.